The day Ray Calloway was supposed to sign a $30 million contract, he never showed up. No phone call, no letter, no explanation. He just disappeared. The developer waited 2 hours at the conference table before packing up and leaving. The lawyers billed for the full morning. The project manager said he'd never seen anything like it in 30 years of construction deals. A man, a nobody from a small town in rural Tennessee, had just walked away from the single biggest opportunity of his career. And nobody understood why. Until now. Before we go any further, if you've ever watched someone sacrifice everything for someone they love, hit that like button right now. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one, and share it because some stories need to be heard. Ray Calloway had been a carpenter since he was 14 years old. Not the kind of carpenter who flips through design magazines or charges city prices. The kind who shows up at 6 in the morning and doesn't leave until the work is right. The kind who can tell by feel whether a joint will hold for 20 years or 40. He grew up outside of Harlan County, Kentucky, the youngest of 5 boys in a household where food was tight and silence was a language all its own. His father had been a coal miner, his grandfather too. But Ray had hands made for wood, not tunnels. By 16, he was fixing porches for neighbors. By 22, he had a crew of 3. By 40, he was the most respected craftsman in 3 counties, known for restorations so precise that architects from Nashville would drive out just to see his work. He didn't have a website. He didn't advertise. Every job came through word of mouth because every piece of work Ray Calloway left behind spoke for itself. But Ray had something even rarer than his skill. He had June. June Calloway, born June Elaine Mercer, had been his wife for 28 years. They'd met at a church fundraiser when they were both 23. She'd been selling pie slices for $1. He'd bought 4 of them just to keep talking to her. She was a school librarian. She read everything. She remembered everything. And she had a way of listening that made people feel like the only person in the room. They had no children. That had been a grief they carried quietly together. But their home was full in ways that square footage can't measure. Full of warmth, full of history, full of the particular kind of peace that only comes from 2 people who genuinely chose each other over and over for decades. Ray worked, June read. On Sundays, they sat on the porch. That was their life, and it was enough. Until the summer, Gordon Hess drove into town.
Gordon Hess was a developer from Chattanooga who'd made his money in historic property restoration. Not flipping, restoring. There was a difference, and Gordon understood it. He'd bought the old Kellerman Mill outside of Cloverfield, Tennessee for $2.1 million. It had been sitting empty for 40 years, but Gordon had a vision. Boutique hotel, event venue, working artisan market. The whole restoration, top to bottom, was budgeted at $30 million. The key to making it work? The woodwork had to be perfect. Historic mills are filled with hand-cut timber framing, original flooring, and decorative millwork that you simply cannot fake with modern materials. Get it wrong, and the whole illusion collapses. Get it right, and you have something that draws visitors from 3 states. Gordon had interviewed 14 contractors. Then someone mentioned Ray Calloway. Gordon drove out on a Wednesday. Ray didn't put on a presentation. He just showed Gordon around the shop, let the work speak. By Friday, Gordon had called with a formal proposal. Ray's scope alone, the full structural and decorative woodwork on the Kellerman Mill, came to $6.8 million. Lead contractor responsibilities would bring the total deal value to just under $30 million. For a man who'd spent his career building things that outlasted him but never made him wealthy, this was a number that didn't feel real. He talked to June about it every night for 3 weeks. She asked all the right questions. She was calm. She told him it was his time. She told him 30 years of perfect work deserved this. She smiled in that particular way she had, warm, steady, certain. You built things that last, she told him. This one should have your name on it. Ray signed the letter of intent. The formal signing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early October. He pressed his best shirt the night before. He never wore it. The call came at 8:47 in the morning. It was from a number Ray didn't recognize, a Knoxville area code. He almost didn't answer. He almost let it go to voicemail, the way he usually did with numbers he didn't know. He had a contract to review, he had a crew to brief, he had a $30 million signing in less than 24 hours. But something made him pick up. The voice on the other end was a Dr. Patricia Shen from the Knoxville Oncology Group. She was calling about June. She had been trying to reach Ray for 2 days, she said. She was sorry to be contacting him this way. She had been June's physician for the past 7 months. She said she understood this was a shock. She said she needed him to come in. She said the situation had become urgent.
Ray stood there for a long time. Then he set the phone down on the workbench. He walked to the house. June was in the kitchen, reading at the table the way she always was in the morning. She looked up when he came in, and the moment she saw his face, she knew. She had been keeping this from him. For 7 months, she had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the spring, stage 3. She had been receiving consultations, imaging, second opinions. She had driven herself to every single appointment. She had told the doctor, told the nurses, told anyone who asked that her husband was not to be contacted directly. She had signed forms. She had been very deliberate. She had not told Ray, because Ray had been in the middle of the most important negotiation of his life. And June Calloway, who had spent 30 years quietly putting other people before herself, had decided, without asking him, that she would not be the reason he lost it. She never considered what it would cost him to find out this way. Ray never called Gordon Hess. He never called the lawyers. He never sent an email. He didn't reach out to his crew or the project manager or any of the subcontractors who had been counting on this deal. He simply didn't show up. By 11 o'clock, Gordon had called Ray's number 6 times. All 6 went to voicemail. By noon, Gordon had driven out to the shop himself. The truck was there, the lights were on, but no one answered the door. The story spread the way small town stories always do, fast, loud, and wrong. People said Ray had panicked, that the scale of the deal had gotten to him, that a man used to working alone couldn't handle the weight of a $30 million contract. They said he'd had a breakdown. They said he'd always been a little odd. The developer moved on. The Kellerman Mill project was reassigned to a firm out of Nashville. The work, from what people heard later, was fine, professional, but not what it might have been. Ray Calloway's professional reputation, the reputation he'd spent 30 years building, absorbed the damage quietly, the way a tree takes a wound into its bark and keeps growing around it. But Ray wasn't in the workshop. Ray was home. For the next 14 months, Ray did not take a single outside job. He spent his days at home. He fixed the porch, the one he'd been meaning to get to for years. He relaid the stone path through the garden. He built June a reading bench out of reclaimed white oak, fitted to exactly her height, with armrests at exactly the right angle for a woman who spent her days with a book in her lap. He drove her to every appointment in Knoxville. He sat in every waiting room. He learned the names of the nurses. He brought them cookies at Christmas from a recipe June dictated from the passenger seat on the drive down.
June had argued with him at first. She told him he should call Gordon, that it wasn't too late, that she didn't need him to sit in waiting rooms. She had managed fine for 7 months on her own, hadn't she? Ray had listened to all of it. Then he'd said, quietly, "I know you did. I know you can, but I'm not going anywhere, June." And he hadn't.
People who had written Ray off as a man who cracked under pressure would have been confused by what they saw if they had seen it. There was no crisis in that house. There was grief, yes, the particular grinding grief of watching someone you love fight a battle that the body is slowly losing. But there was no panic, no regret, no bitterness. There was just Ray, present, steady, showing up every single day the way he had shown up to every piece of work in his life, completely. He told a neighbor once when asked what happened to the big deal, "I had more important work to do." The neighbor assumed he meant something else. He meant exactly what he said. June Calloway died on a Tuesday morning in late March. The forsythia in the garden was just beginning to bloom, the yellow kind she'd planted herself along the south fence because she said she needed something to look at in early spring before anything else came back. She was 61 years old. At her memorial, held in the gymnasium of the school where she'd worked for 23 years, more than 300 people came. Former students, parents, teachers, neighbors, people who said she had changed the way they thought about books, and by extension, about everything. Ray sat in the front row and did not speak publicly. He didn't need to. It was in the weeks after, going through June's things, that Ray found the journal. She had kept one, apparently, for the last year of her life. Short entries, observations, the names of birds at the feeder, what she'd read that week, notes about the garden. And in the entries from the spring before she told him, the spring of the negotiations, the letter of intent, the contract reviews at the kitchen table, Ray read what June had really been doing during all those quiet mornings she spent with her coffee and her book. She had been writing about him. Entry after entry, about his work, about his hands, about the way he talked about the mill project with a kind of wonder she hadn't seen in him in years. She wrote about watching him press his shirt the night before the signing. She wrote about how proud she was. She wrote about how she had memorized the way he looked those evenings at the table, surrounded by documents, finally receiving what 30 years of quiet excellence deserved. She had known she was dying for the entire time they sat at that table and talked about the deal. She had smiled through every conversation. She had asked him questions about joinery details and budget timelines and contractor liability, not because she needed to know, but because she wanted him to keep talking. She wanted to hear his voice filled with possibility. She was already letting go. She was already saying goodbye. And he had almost missed it. In the last entry she ever wrote, 3 days before she finally allowed the doctor to call him, June had written this: "I keep thinking I should tell him, but every time I try, I watch him at that workbench, and I think, not yet. Let him have this a little longer. He's earned it. God, he has earned it." Ray read that entry 4 times. Then he closed the journal, went out to the garden, and sat on the bench he had built for her, fitted to her height, armrests at exactly the right angle, and stayed there until the forsythia stopped catching the light. People who tell this story like to say Ray Calloway sacrificed a $30 million deal for love. But that's not quite right. He didn't sacrifice anything. He just finally understood what June had understood the whole time she was sitting across from him at that kitchen table, watching him talk about a future she already knew she wouldn't be in. That the only thing in that house worth $30 million was already dying. She never told him she was sick because she didn't want him to be the reason he stayed. She was always the only reason that mattered. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Like and subscribe for more stories about the people history forgets. I'll see you in the next one.